Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our Road Rules 360s episodes. I'm Wendy. I started Get Around Cabo Car Free. I'm going to rebrand later on this year, so watch this space for a new name. And I'm here with...
John Burrill is my name. I'm retired, been retired a few years now, and I was for 20 years a subject matter expert in the road rules, working for the State Department of Transport and Main Roads. So good to be here, giving her a bit of assistance, hoping to help as best I can with curly questions.
Yeah, well, we've got a curly one today. We're here on Gubby Gubby Country, and we're doing a bit of a different one today. In the last couple of weeks, I've seen some posts on one of the social media websites that professionals use. Somebody posted up about putting a box trailer in the street outside their place, and they had put some plants in there, created a garden to sort of expand the space of their garden. Somebody else posted on there that they had put a little closed-in space, and they used that for their bike locker because they were in an inner city area and they didn't have enough space in the house. I didn't know what the road rules were for that and whether you had to have a registered vehicle, whether you had to move it. I had a bit of a look around on the various community chat sites and they're about as handy as a pocket and a singlet in terms of information. It says you've got to do this and you can't do that and you've got to... And I just thought, let's go to the font of all knowledge.
What about that? A little careful.
You've been retired for 6 years, as you said. We are here to entertain and inform. We're a bit rubbish on the entertainment bit, but we're trying our best to inform. We're just going to give a bit of a crack about Queensland road rules. It's September 2024, and we're just going to give a bit of an idea about what's possible with parking trailers, and we might do also a little bit of bicycles and a couple of other things that are also a little bit parking related.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. I showed you before a box trailer. I saw one on Marketplace and I thought, could I get that registered? It's currently not registered. It's super cheap. It's fairly small, 7 foot by 4 foot. What's that in the new money? 2.5 meters by 2 meters or something like that. 1.5 meters.
Just a small standard box trailer.
Bit rusted out in the bottom.
Yep.
It said no rego, so quite cheap. And I just thought, okay, so could I get that registered?
Yeah, you could get it registered. You have to fill in the form. You would need the VIN number, vehicle identification number. Once you've got those things, it would be a fairly simple process just to go through the hoops. A trailer that small would be a lot less than 750 kilograms. It's only once you get above that weight for your trailer that you start having to involve various certificates and other requirements.
By that number, 750 kilos, you're talking about something called the ATM.
ATM.
Yeah,
aggregate
which is
trailer mass.
Okay, and that is how much you can put inside the trailer?
Well, it's basically how much the trailer itself plus whatever you could put in there. It's very complicated to work it all out. And I think for the purposes that you're talking about, it wouldn't really matter because the kind of trailer that you're thinking about and imagining here is more likely to be 300, 350, 400 kilograms at the most.
If I wanted to get it registered, I could just, as long as I had the VIN and it was under 750, it doesn't need an inspection then.
No.
You just do it online.
You can do it online, I think.
Probably.
You'd have to check that.
You'd want obviously a wheel clamp or someone will nick off with it. Not that they would want to steal my beautiful garden.
Yes.
And it needs to be parked 10 metres from the intersection.
Yeah, from an intersection, 10 metres from an unsignalised intersection.
Right,
if there's
20
no
metres.
lights there,
Right,
20
metres
metres
from
if it's a traffic lights.
So now tell me, where is an intersection? So on my little suburban street. We have really wide turning radius for the garbage trucks, basically.
Yeah.
Where is the end of the intersection?
If you can imagine, instead of having a curve, if it's square.
Yeah.
So if you imagine a projection of each of the sides of the road
Yeah.
in a straight line, wherever they intersect, that's the point you measure from. It will be basically from that line that you draw between the two curbs, you would measure from that distance. It's 10 metres, it's not very far.
And it needs to have reflective things.
Well, yes, if it's a box trailer parked on a road, it has to be registered. It's classified as a vehicle. That's a critical thing. So all of the normal requirements for a vehicle would need to apply, as in reflectors. If you were to ever plug it into a towing vehicle, the lights would have to work, the indicators, the brake lights, all of those would need to be functioning. However, if you're never, ever intending to hook it up to a towing vehicle, then begs the question, who's going to know and how are you going to find out? It becomes irrelevant almost.
All right, who's going to know? As much as I have lovely neighbours, you just never know. Somebody can walk past and go, oi, and there is a lot of vindictiveness. Somebody sees your front, whatever, they just go, take exception to it, and they report it. So I think it's important that we only give things that we think are legal, John. We're not supposed to be talking about anything illegal. And the other thing is that you do need to be aware that this is a public space that your neighbours are going to look at. And if you want to get on with your neighbours, that has to be something that has to be considered. It needs to be attractive. You don't want to be trashing your neighbourhood areas and stuff like that. Particularly if they've got their house on the market. That's something to think about. You don't want to devalue the space.
Yeah, but I would have thought that a box trailer with flowers in it, I could think of far worse things that you could park out legally in front of your house and it would be a complete eyesore. But a box trailer, or the other thing you mentioned was an enclosed box trailer with a capability of carrying bicycles in it, putting bike racks in there. Again, same thing. If it's registered and if it's kept registered, which is literally just an annual payment of whatever it is, $130, $150 or whatever it might be.
So a trailer is essentially a vehicle if it's got a registration number on the back.
Yes, has to be registered.
In Queensland, a mobility scooter, one of those four-wheeler ones that people with disabilities use, that has a registration plate. Is that allowed to be, say, parked on the street?
Yeah, you can park it on the street. I'm not sure why you ever would, but you could.
I guess if you lived on maybe a cul-de-sac or something like that, you could do that.
Yeah, you could. I would say it's a situation where if you normally use it as a mobility device to get to the shops and back, for example, but you are still capable of walking, then, there might be a way of, I'm not really conversant with that type of device, but you could lock it, leave it on the side of the road, go in, have your breakfast, come out again, get back on it, ride it away. But just another point, there are some that don't have to be registered, and I think, careful I'm not speaking out of turn here, but ones that you have to be in other words, you are incapacitated to the point where you can't actually get out of the thing on your own, that puts it into a different category. What we're talking about here is something different to that.
And those four-wheel mobility scooters, you're not supposed to be riding them on the street anyway, unless there's no footpath.
That's right. It's a good point. You can't use them in the same way as you can a car. In the suburbs, you do see it occasionally. Somebody pottering along at a very slow speed on their mobility scooter, basically driving along as if they were a car. Not allowed to do that. It's one of the things I remember from my days in the department that we developed was working out what is a good thing to put on the registration plate to make it clear what the device is. And certainly while I was there, the decision was made to just put the word pedestrian on there because effectively they are still a pedestrian even though they're using this mobility device. Because the word pedestrian is there, it helps the user to understand that they can't use it in the same way as you could a normal motor vehicle driving a car. In other words, you're a pedestrian, usually you'd be on the footpath or using your mobility device in the same way as you would be if you were walking along the road as a pedestrian.
So let's talk about bicycles and e-scooters. You could technically park a bicycle or a scooter where you would park a car. There's nothing to say you can't.
Nothing to stop you at all, no.
Yeah, okay. All right, so let's cover a little bit of the parking rules that affect pedestrians, people with disability, scooters, prams, because a lot of people don't understand that there are issues with parking, for instance, on your driveway that blocks a footpath.
Yes,
that's
a common one.
And
people get very annoyed when they get a ticket for that because they think it's their driveway.
I know, I've had people scream at me because I'm going back up, I'm on the footpath, and they're like, but it's the driveway. There is a video going around at the moment, and it talks about what we do is we actually design our urban spaces. We make it so that it prioritizes car movement over anybody else. So even if you look, for instance, at most driveways, you go from the street into the house, it takes priority over the footpath. So the way it's designed is that it goes from the street and it goes straight into the house. And the footpath is cut off, and it's the colour of the driveway, and then it becomes the footpath again. And that gives the driver and the pedestrian the idea that driver has priority. It's a psychological... It is. It's poor design.
It's incorrect. It's completely incorrect. From a legal perspective, if you are driving your car and you are turning into your driveway and there's a footpath that goes across your driveway, you must give way to anything that's on that footpath. Pedestrian, cyclist, personal mobility device, no matter what.
So across our street here, you can see there's a driveway opposite. Now that's grass verge. Now that's essentially an unpaved footpath. Is that roughly how it's understood?
It will be classified as a nature strip. It's not actually a footpath. It will be a nature strip in that respect, and it butts up to the driveway. But the same rules apply. I mean, if you are a pedestrian or a cycle user or any other kind of device user on that nature strip travelling along, any vehicle turning into that space is required to give way to you if you're crossing. It's a common misunderstanding. You often see vehicles parked in what they think is the driveway, but what is in actual fact not the driveway. It is public property. That space between where your boundary of your property ends and where the road starts at the curb. That space is not yours. It doesn't belong to you. And if you put your car there blocking that space, then people do get tickets. Council issue tickets for it. I
went for a walk not very far away, and the space outside the front, and I was actually talking about the footpath, and I said, the footpath's not very good, and he's going, I don't see why I should have to mow that part because it's the council land. Why should I have to mow it? Why is it my responsibility? If they want it mowed, then they're... You can see why it's confusing, because if you have responsibility for something, then why should you pay for it? It's an interesting dilemma.
Some tensions there is, and especially where I live, in fact, is sort of semi-rural, and the nature strip in front of our property is actually huge, long. If I hadn't got a ride-on mower, it would take me an hour to mow. Ride-on mower, it takes about 5 or 10 minutes, but I do it. But there are some people that decide not to, and they get into a bit of trouble with the council because there is this sort of agreement that even though it's council property, it's the frontage to your own house. I'm not sure of the rules around that, but we're digressing.
We are digressing, but I think it's all part of the same question. Another thing that is often misunderstood is that people do what they call polite parking, which I think is very impolite, where they park half the car on the road and half the car on the grass. I was so miffed with a friend of mine who was always parking on, half off, that I put up, you know, out the front of my place I've got this sort of wall of some flowers, just flowers, a very thin veneer of flowers to stop people driving on the lawn. But people do it everywhere and they think that it's legal, but it's absolutely not.
No, it's not. It's not legal. If you've got two wheels left side of your vehicle up onto the nature strip or the footpath or whatever, then that can draw a ticket from the local council or the police officer. That's something else we discussed. Council usually would have a set of local laws that govern parking, and they can issue tickets for those laws, but the state government can also issue tickets, as in via the police, for exactly the same offences. There are some situations, I know this is where a lot of residents have really got annoyed about. There are some new residential areas where the roads that they've built are extremely narrow. It's impossible, illegal to park two vehicles, one on either side of the road, because you're left in the middle with a gap that is probably only about 2 metres, where legally you're meant to leave 3. To counter that, people park up with half the vehicle on the curb. That has the effect of leaving the 3 metres, but it's still illegal to do it.
And it also takes space from the footpath, means that pedestrians can't use that space.
That's right, or makes it a lot more difficult, especially if you're a disabled pedestrian and using a device to assist. It's bad news.
I have a friend and she said, when you start pushing a pram, you become militant about footpaths. And I quote that to mums all the time.
I can understand that.
Yeah, and they go, yeah, I get it. So, all right, so you can park a car, you can park a trailer, a vehicle. Could you park a tiny home?
as in a caravan?
A tiny home. I've sort of sprung this question on you, John.
You have.
A tiny home is on the size of a trailer. It would have to be registered because it would have a larger ATM than 750. Could you park a small tiny home out the front?
If it's classified as a trailer, a registrable trailer, then I don't see any reason why not, because what you're describing is basically a caravan. A caravan is a tiny home on wheels that is registrable and towable, and you can certainly park it outside of your house.
I've now brought up a picture so that John can see that and he has a bit of an idea. They're quite fashionable. A lot of women are quite keen on them because A, they don't have to clean them so much, and B, they can afford them. Here you can see it's got wheels on either side.
Yeah.
If you had a rego plate at the back and front, you had lights, presumably.
Lights and reflectors. I mean, it would become a caravan. I mean, what you would do if you had something like that, and the way to make it legal would be to ensure that it fulfills all of the parameters and the requirements for a caravan, because then you could register as a caravan and you could park it there. To be honest with you, you'd be far better off getting a caravan rather than getting something like that, which is something that looks different to a caravan. It looks like a small wooden house with some kind of a chassis built underneath of it. I'd need to have a good look at that to see whether that would qualify as a caravan. It would need to be a caravan, I would suspect, in order for it to be legally parked on the side of the road outside of your house, because it needs to be registered. And if that's not a caravan, or it's not a trailer in the usual sense of the word, you would have difficulty getting it registered. Now, let me give you an idea of what I'm thinking about. I mean, let's just say, for example, that you've got it parked there and you take the wheels away. It ceases to be a trailer, it becomes a fixture. You would have to certainly retain what's legally required in order for a caravan to be used.
Because of the housing crisis at the moment, say my elderly mother, okay, she doesn't want to live in the home because, you know, it's a bit noisy, she was happy to be near it, and we don't have space to have my mum living here, say, but we could get a tiny home, park it on the curb, and it would be registered, it would be a proper vehicle. She's got access to the kids.
Yeah, we are getting into an area here that is beyond my expertise, because I think even when it comes to caravans, you see, caravans, if you're officially referring to something that is a caravan, there are other laws that come into play about people living in that caravan, because it then becomes a dwelling, and the rules and regulations about dwellings and what's required for a dwelling are definitely complex, and they're nothing to do with the road rules.
So it's interesting that you can park a vehicle on the road. It's only designed for vehicles. You're not allowed to have anything else on there. But when you look at photographs from, say, 100 years ago and on the street, there used to be stalls and there used to be all sorts of things, and all that has been removed. So what's your sense about the history about why is it that you can only park basically car things on the street as opposed to human things?
Well, I think you've said it many times before. We have developed into a car-centric culture where cars do take precedence. Most of the road rules are geared and sort of swinging to people that use and drive motor vehicles. It's to do with motor vehicles, and that takes precedence. It is changing. Active transport is up and coming thing. There's a lot more action being taken in the road rules and other areas like infrastructure as well to accommodate active transport and the like. But what we're talking about here is having a tiny house parked outside your home, or even just having a caravan parked outside your home. It's fine, it's no problem, but the moment it becomes a dwelling, then a whole host of other rules suddenly trigger them.
So I'm pleased we had this conversation because a few years ago I was single and I was poor and I was going, well, what can I do? And I thought, maybe I'll get a tiny home. And I was going, well, where can I park it? I went to a community event held by one of the local politicians, and it was all about the homelessness crisis.
Yes.
If you were to allow a tiny tiny home, it's got wheels, it's got a registration, it can be moved. Why couldn't we use that?
Very good question.
I think that we have to think about how do we use our street space? Anything else to add about parking?
I think we've mentioned some of the rules, but there's quite a plethora of rules about stopping and parking generally that you probably need to get your head around to understand the whole issue around parking. I think from what we've discussed, I think it's pretty clear. Box trailer, small caravan, if it's not being used as a dwelling, you can park it on the side of the road so long as it's registered and it stays registered. No problem at all. Yeah.
The purpose of the vehicle is as a vehicle. For instance, if you parked it out there and you made it into your cafe, for instance.
Or it becomes something else then. It becomes a business. Or if it becomes a business or a dwelling, then a whole raft of other rules would suddenly fall upon you like a ton of bricks.
Right, so if you wanted to do your hairdressing salon outside, but you think about, like, for millennia, this is what people have done. You've had a barber or shoe shine, as they used to do in the olden days. Yeah. All that was sort of on the street, and now that's all gone.
Street traders.
And that's all gone. Yeah. In New York, there was a woman and she had sort of a sewing machine.
Buskers.
Yeah, buskers. Yeah, she had a sewing machine and she's like, bring your secondhand clothes that you buy at the charity shop and I'll turn it into something funky. So she had a little stall like that, and you think, yeah, this is really cool. People just come along and have a bit of a chat, a bit of a natter. But that would be illegal, presumably, here, which I think shows sort of what do we prioritise? Do we prioritise people earning an income, living independently, increasing the street vibrancy, or do we prioritise people driving really quickly? And we've lost a lot along the way in the last 50 years, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else to add, John?
I don't think so. I think just about covers it, Wendy.
All right.
We done a good job.
It was an off-the-cuff one, wasn't it? We didn't go through any of the road rules, but we did talk generally about road rules. So I thought it was very handy. So now I feel inspired to get that $150 box trailer.
$150. Be careful. That's not much of a box trailer.
He did have some issues with it, I think. All right, that's it. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.